Hey guys, today I wanted to give you a demo of a new feature I added to Sitecore Foundation. I'm calling it Handlebar Forms. Now, if you're not familiar with handlebars, handlebars are a useful way that enable you to quickly build interfaces without having to build any new components. It allows you to define handlebar templates that are actually stored as Sitecore items that can then bind to other Sitecore items to actually display them. So one of the things I decided to do is take this a step further, build a form container component that allowed you to define handlebar templates for your forms and your responses to those forms, as well as a processor layer that allows you to find custom processors that actually work on that data. So this is the end result. You can actually see it on sitecorefoundation.com. One of the cool processors that I've actually implemented is what I'm calling the user settings processor. Now, another area of Sitecore Foundation is a custom facet for user settings that can be defined as key value pairs and grouped by areas. So I'll show you, we can actually configure a processor to leverage that to actually store it. So I've actually filled this out before, and it came pre-filled with these values because these are the values in my facet. So it gives you a quick way of defining forms that not only process data but can remember the questions you have and store them. And I actually even have a personalization rule that you can use that based on something that you enter here, you can personalize your page based on that. And I'll show you a little bit about that a little bit later. But first, let's jump into the content editor. And I'll start at the topmost layer, which is the actual form component. So like other handlebar components, which define a container, which tells you what items to actually bind to, the form component gives you that as well. You'll see this little wrench icon. You can click to see the main fields in that container component. In here, we allow you to define separate data sources for your content and your post-processing data set. So when I scroll down a little bit, you'll see there's actually two placeholders. There's the initial form placeholder, and then there's a placeholder for what happens, what you display after the response is done. In addition, you'll see this in a second. So in this case, I'm just using the same item that has all the fields that I want for both of them. And you can see there are two processors. I'll show you these a little bit later, but I have a SQL processor to store things in the database, and a user settings processor which stores it in a facet. And then here, I actually have a redirection link. So if you don't want to display the other placeholder on submission, you can have it redirect to whatever page you want. Okay, so that defines the template. Now, the content templates really is all about the question names, right? So sample form title is there, form placeholder, all your names. So this acts just like if it was a normal component that you built custom for the form. What are the different fields you're using to kind of store those labels and deal with it? And you can see the after submission, I mean, that's just a thank you message. But these aren't components. These are handlebar templates. So you actually can click on the outer container, and as a developer, and this is something even you can hide from your content authors if you don't want them to even see this button, you can click that to actually see the template. So let me edit code so you can see it a little bit better, because we have this nice interface that supports things like autocomplete and syntax highlighting. But you can see this is binding to that, and it's just going to give you the editor for title, description, question one. You can see we're defining basically all the questions. And then the other thing you see here is in this value area, we're actually defaulting the value to this new handlebar helper function called user setting. And what this is going to do is going to see if the user has a facet set, a custom facet value set for a user setting facet. That is a custom facet I'll show you that we've implemented to allow you to store kind of key value pairs at your user. Now, this is the key. There is a default area, but we are using a custom area for the name of our form so that the data that we're collecting here is just grouped into that area. It just makes it easier from an organization standpoint. And then finally, we have the submit button label. And here you can see we're doing value. The reason I'm doing the underscore value is so that you don't go through the field renderer. It's another syntactic sugar added to the handlebar components. It was already there. And the reason you want to do that is because you don't want this to appear editable inside an attribute. All right, so that's that template. The other one's just as simple. So this is the handlebar template. That's really just a P with the thank you message, which is another field in that same template. But if you want, you can have them point to the same template. That's up to you. So really that's it. That's what gets it to render it. Now on the processing side, if we look under global, we have a new folder called form processors, and right now I only have two. You can kind of duplicate these as you see if you want to configure them differently. Matter of fact, if I go here, I can do a new user settings processor or SQL processor, and then I'm sure I'll add other ones like email, but right now this was kind of the V1, and I think it's pretty functional. So let's start with SQL, and the idea here is you want to take your form and you want to insert into a table in the database. So the idea here is you want to take your form and insert into a table in the database, and that could be whatever you want. It depends on your data. So we need a generic form processor. It basically enables you to define a couple of things. The connection string, in this case, is just a dummy table that I've created. And then I created a generic table, and it just had generic columns. And that's our query, and notice it's parameterized query. So we need to tell it how to map form request parameters to SQL parameters. So you can see here, our named inputs, question 1 through 4, are being mapped to columns 1 through 4. And what this processor will do is go take that, map them, and do the insert. So similar to that, we have a user settings processor, which really just defines the area. Now this is related to that user setting facet, which is specific to Sitecore Foundation, and your questions. So that user settings processor can be used to kind of persist data between form sessions. It can also be used as a basis for personalization. And I'll show you more on the user settings facet in another session. So that's really it. It gives you a really flexible way to define custom form interfaces using handlebar markup. It gives you the ability to find your own processors. The types are just here. As long as you just implement an interface, you can do that, and choose what you want to do with the data. Now that does mean, since this markup you completely control, you could use whatever libraries you want. You're also responsible for form validation. So expect to deal with it on the client side. It probably is also a good idea to make sure you have some sort of form validation on the server side. You can either implement it as a separate processor or add it to whatever custom processor you're implementing. Just to show you a little more on the implementation, on the code side, you can see we have this new form processors. iForm process is pretty basic, and our implementations are pretty straightforward. This is kind of my initial version. I may end up refining this to kind of have more of an args environment, an args parameter that kind of deals with things. The other thing I probably want to implement is some ability to have the form error out and go back to the form with validation messages, which I think may work. So the actual controller is actually in the handlebars controller. Yep, so right now they just process an order, but I probably add an arg so that we can control and allow it to go back. Like I said, I just checked it in. Definitely some room to improve and extend, and we'll let you know when that's in there. But that's it for now. Hope this is something you can use. If not, or either way, let me know. Thanks.